Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ralph Simon, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Mobilium International.
Well done. Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen. Now we go to not the dark continent, but the bright continent. Something really interesting to talk to you about now. My name is Ralph Simon. Let me see, where's my little clicker? Ah, here we are. Very good. Okay, so any dead people in the audience, or the doctor's taken care of everybody here? Oh, good. So we've got some people that are alive. Thank God for that. Okay, so, yes. Wireless health in Africa. Why we thought this was so important is because things in Africa are really changing, and I thought I'd take you through some of the interesting elements in what is going on in Africa that I thought might have some particular relevance to yourselves, both in terms of technology, in terms of connected health, and in terms of where there might be some really great opportunities for you in this really exciting new world of Africa. So if one looks at a map of Africa today, that graphic that I'm showing you on the screen there pretty much sums up what Africa is all about today, as a matter of fact. But what is also interesting is this. In sub-Saharan Africa carries about 24% of the global disease burden. 24% of the burden, which is far ahead of the global population share of Africa. And of course, the main culprits in this global burden, 24%, are three key areas: tuberculosis, TB, malaria, and of course HIV/AIDS. And the other thing that is really changing in Africa, because it's a big place, how many of you know how many countries there are in Africa? Anyone want to take a guess? 52. Close but no cigar. Anyone else? 57. Anyone else? 35. Anyone else? One more? 70. 54 countries, maybe 55 with the secession of South Sudan from Sudan, North and South Sudan. So a lot of countries, it is a big place. And interestingly enough, one of the interesting things that's been happening is that the profile of African illness has also been changing. Mass urbanization. Lagos, the capital of, not the capital of Nigeria, but the biggest city in Nigeria, 20 million plus people. And what you're seeing is that people are living longer in Africa. There's rapid urbanization, obviously. There are Western diseases that are starting to manifest themselves there, like high blood pressure, asthma. And interestingly enough, the two big pharmaceutical leaders in Africa, Glaxo, one, and Sanofi. We had a speaker here from Sanofi yesterday. Anyone in the audience from Sanofi today? I'm sure there must be. There we are, two of them there. Very good. Lovely to see you there. Leaders in Africa. People spend $18 billion a year on pharmaceuticals in Africa, expected to go up to $45 billion in 2020. So really interesting. And when you talk about how big Africa is, how big is it? It is big, 54 and a half, 55 countries. Big, big, big. But it's a multiple personality, multiple languages, very different. What goes on in East Africa, which is primarily Swahili speaking, is different from what goes on in Southern and Central Africa. As in South Africa, obviously prominent because of Nelson Mandela and freedom in the country since 1994. But of course, Central Africa is a very important hub because it produces some of the smartest people in Africa, very well educated. That's one thing that Mugabe did not kill, which was the educational system in Zimbabwe. But just to give you some kind of idea, the other big problems in Africa, of course, are sanitation and electricity. Only 24% of all of Africa has got electricity. Just think of that, 24% of a huge continent. So how big is big? Because size does matter. So 1 billion people, that's a lot. It's a lot of people. 1 billion, made up of many different swatches and tribes and languages and cultural groupings and so forth. Very big. 620 million mobile phone users and growing really, really fast. But of those, the majority of the mobile phone subscribers in Africa generally tend to be people who have feature phones. That is the most basic kind of phone that you can actually get. But that's changing because there is a very fast uplift and demand for smartphones. And insofar as smartphones are concerned, you're seeing an interesting phenomenon that was started really in India about 2 or 3 years ago by an Indian company called Micromax that in India ate a lot of Nokia's lunch by bringing out a very low-cost touchscreen smartphone. And now in Africa, you're seeing the emergence of low-cost touchscreen smartphones. Huawei, the very big Chinese company, wanting to introduce stuff there. Any one of you heard of a company called MyPhone, M-I-F-O-N-E? Well, MyPhone is a real African low-cost touchscreen smartphone that's like the iPhone of Africa, really developing something interesting. And of course, the other thing is the internet is starting to grow because what's happened over the last couple of years is an interesting phenomenon. Over the last few years, there's been the development and the installation of the undersea cables on the east and west coasts of Africa that effectively is bringing the internet to mobile. What's interesting about this, when one thinks of all of the developments in Africa, I mean, how many of you are familiar with the fact that Africa has even produced its first astronaut? Does anyone know who that astronaut is? Nobody knows who the first astronaut is. Has anyone ever heard of Mark Shuttleworth? One of the original, I think he was one of the founders of PayPal, and then Ubuntu. Everyone heard of him? Well, he's just one of the very clever blokes that comes from Africa, men and women actually. They're very smart. But just to give you an idea in terms of internet and internet usage, the implementation of the submarine cables is allowing for a massive pickup in internet traffic. So these are the top 5 internet countries in Africa. Look at those there. You'll see Nigeria top. Surprisingly, one thinks always of South Africa as being such a leader. But of course, Nigeria, 200 million people. 200 million. That's a lot of people. I was recently with the Minister of Telecommunications in Nigeria, a woman by the name of Mrs. Omobola Johnson. She's very hip. She's very cool. She believes that the young people of Nigeria are going to turn to low-cost iPads, low-cost tablets, should I say, because tablets are going to become a medium for educational instruction and very important, and of course for Nigeria and those top 5 countries in terms of internet implementation. This is just the start of a whole important new area that's being developed in Africa. So I thought I'd show you this. I don't know if you can see that slide very clearly, but I thought I'd give you some idea of the major mobile operators in Africa. You've got MTN, which is a big company, biggest, funnily enough, South African company with corporate headquarters in Dubai, but also the biggest telco operator in Nigeria. You've got Etisalat up there, top right. You've got Airtel, the biggest Indian operator, also co-owned by Singtel, operating very big in Africa. You've got Orange, a French company, obviously taking some precedence in the Francophone states. So even though there's been some difficulty in Mali and in the Ivory Coast over the last 12 months, the Francophone states still represent an important bloc. So this gives you some kind of idea of the mobile penetration, which is becoming an increasingly important factor for commerce, for business, and of course for health and the provision of health, as we are seeing the emergence, and it's going to become more and more rapid over the next 12 to 24 months, of connected health and wireless health. Here's another slide. I thought I'd just give you some idea. The ARPU, average revenue per user, $8 a month. Not great, but when one thinks of the size of Africa and also the low economic base, I'm very interested in a company here in San Diego called Cricket Telecom that goes to the very low end of the economic spectrum in the United States. And there certainly are going to be those similar kind of approaches. Cricket Telecom, very successful with their Move, M-U-V-E, music platform that has really attracted tremendous loyalty from the lowest end of the economic pyramid. And you see similar things like that in Africa. I don't know if you can see that graphic clearly, but that gives you some kind of idea of the leading countries. Even Libya, which of course is in such chaos today, Libya at one point really had tremendous mobile penetration, and that's something that you are seeing a little bit disturbed in North Africa. Tunisia, obviously problems there, problems in Syria, problems in Libya, North Africa, but countries like Morocco, very buoyant in terms of mobile, and it really is in East, West, Southern and Central Africa that you're going to see most of the big push and spread for what's coming in terms of connected and wireless health. I thought I'd give you this opportunity of having a look at a slide showing the penetration and penetration rates really. If you look at the UK, it's 136%. Funnily enough, the United Arab Emirates has probably got the highest penetration, people having 2 phones, and dual SIMs now also very important. But if you have a look at the African countries, South Africa, 134%, people having business and private phones. Ghana, people in Ghana, Ghanaians are generally considered to be the educators of Africa. Wonderful country, democratic transition when their former president died in office and the new president came in without too much hubbub. And of course, Ghana have just discovered a huge find of oil and natural gas, which means that the whole economic equation of West Africa is going to change because of Ghana. Zambia, very interesting, country's on a very upward climb with a new president. Kenya is generally regarded as one of the most important hubs in Africa. And in fact, it's interesting that during the recent trouble in Egypt, in Tahrir Square, it was a Kenyan platform called Ushahidi that was founded by some Kenyans in Nairobi at a wonderful development hub called the iHub that was used to alert when there was violence at the ballot boxes at the polls. Ushahidi was something you could text into that would alert people to where trouble was, and that same platform was used in Egypt during the Arab Spring in Tahrir Square, interestingly enough. There's also another developing hub in Lagos, Nigeria called CC Hub, and there's also another big innovation center that's starting to become a burgeoning center for new mobile and wireless innovation in Botswana. Botswana, who would think of Botswana even as a viable country? But of course, Botswana is one of the wealthiest countries in sub-Saharan Africa with its massive mining deposits. So I thought I'd just give you this idea of some of the penetration, even in the Congo, which some people say is still a basket case. Well, it's improving, not very quickly. But Uganda, Tanzania, Cameroon, Nigeria, and interestingly enough, just in Cameroon, I thought I'd tell you something interesting about Cameroon. There's a fascinating company in Cameroon that are really pioneering a whole new use of tablets. They call themselves CardioPad. They've developed a whole basis and a platform for ECG services on the go, portable computer systems. There are a number of these tablet visionaries across Africa. And just in the Cameroon, you see the nice map there of Cameroon, always well known for their soccer stars. But also, CardioPad is really changing the way that the Francophone countries might be looking at ECG services and everything to do with cardio on the move, a very interesting development for Africa. So here's a fellow from Kenya. Now, you ladies in the house, take a look at that chap and the way that he decides to keep his phone now. You know, I've seen many people in New York and certainly on the Venice Boulevard in Los Angeles who've decided they're going to have a hole in their ear. I think they've got a hole in their head. But nonetheless, if you look at that, this is very interesting because although Africa today has got very modern touches, one has to remember that a very large component of Africa is still very, very rural. So this bloke with a phone in his ear, you must admit it's quite a creative way of making sure that you have a hands-free phone, but just, well, it is really. I mean, it's hands-free, it's lobe full, but hands-free. But if you have a look at that, and you can see it's a feature phone carried by this chap. I think he's a Maasai. You know, the Maasais are the very tall warriors that basically have got incredible energy. Of course, many Kenyans are well known for being marathon runners. This fellow's a marathon talker, as you can see. But nonetheless, there's another interesting example. One has always got to look at the unusual. And you know, you think we're living in California, it's sophisticated. We look at, things like jawbone, very sophisticated. But in Africa, sometimes it's economic that doesn't allow you to do these things, to get the latest hot, cool stuff. I mean, it's not Silicon Valley, it's Africa. And in Africa, everything is about the spirit. You know, people talk about the spirit of Ubuntu. This is something that Nelson Mandela always used to talk about. Ubuntu is a Xhosa word for the spirit of the community, where you've got to think of we and not me. And so consequently, many, many things in Africa are guided by this spirit of we and not me. So here's a chap obviously talking to his girlfriend, it seems, and so completely enamored with his phone that he even does his own kind of makeshift view of doing it. So I wanted to show you some of the key focus areas in connected and wireless health, because these are some of the key areas those of you that are in these spaces or want to look for and work to Africa should be aware of the following. Pre- and postnatal care, very, very important, getting government notice, but also very important because of the high birth rate, and also now with the widespread of mobile all over the place, women are getting a much, much better opportunity of getting direct pre- and postnatal care, education, help and input directly from their phones, presently the majority being feature phones, but this is moving fast. Okay, then looking at general public health and wellness care, malaria, as I mentioned earlier, TB, very important, big disease group. Obviously, HIV/AIDS in South Africa, some 5.3 million out of 40 million people are HIV positive, a big problem there. And then, of course, the other interesting area of distance diagnosis and monitoring. Very, very important, particularly because of rural areas, the difficulty of roads not necessarily being like the highway system in America. But the fact is that distance diagnosis with visual imagery sent from, say, the bush or small rural clinics into large centers like Nairobi in Kenya, Lagos, Johannesburg, Cape Town, cities like that, or Blantyre in Malawi, or Harare in Zimbabwe, or in Maputo in Mozambique. So these are some of the key areas, and those three main culprits, malaria, TB, and HIV, do take up a lot of work. Now, this is a map showing you the submarine cables. This is key for Africa. They're being connected all the time. Those are the connection points on the east and west coasts of Africa, and you can see there that there's a lot of connectivity now into Africa. This is a major game changer for all of you professionals here at this conference, because it's this that's going to help shape much, much more connected health and wellness products, demand, services, etc. in the months to come. Okay, so here's an interesting slide. What is this Visa credit card you speak of? They ask, these Maasai warriors in Kenya. We use M-Pesa. How many of you have heard of M-Pesa? Oh my God. 2, 3 people. Don Jones, good for you, Don. Don is definitely one of the gurus of the space. So M-Pesa is an interesting, very, very interesting, because M-Pesa was actually started about 7 years ago and led to Kenya becoming the leader in the world in mobile money and mobile commerce. It was actually developed by Michael Joseph, the CEO of Safaricom, together with 2 executives from Vodafone, because Safaricom is part of Vodafone, and in addition, a well-known design studio that called Sagentia Design, DD, maybe take note of that. But M-Pesa is effectively a fast, secure, culturally accessible transaction mechanism. 11 to 12% of the Kenyan economy now use M-Pesa. You can buy a can of Coke, you can pay for your kids' school fees, and effectively you use minutes, because bearing in mind, in Africa, 96% of people are pay-as-you-go subscribers. So M-Pesa has enabled people, allowing them to pay for things with their mobile, and it's massive. It's absolutely massive. Here's an M-Pesa sign. So what M-Pesa is doing is it's really helping people be able to pay for services, which are going to include, of course, medical and wellness services, where you pay for your minutes. What happened was Safaricom went to a number of banks, 4 or 5 banks in Kenya, and said, let's make minutes the currency. If you get a top-up for your phone, you've got minutes. You want to buy football kit for your kids, you can pay with your minutes. Visa International in San Francisco spent $110 million acquiring a Southern African company called Fundamo that had a mobile commerce platform, and they're using that platform, M-Pesa style, to roll out mobile commerce and mobile money in Latin America. So America, gradually you're seeing Visa, you're seeing Square, you're seeing payment mechanisms, but M-Pesa is really the leader. Who would have thought, ladies and gentlemen, that Kenya would have become a leader in this field? I mean, who would have thought? But there you go, look at that, M-Pesa. They even get registration. Looks like it's an interesting spelling of the word there, but nonetheless, very, very important wherever you go. And there's some people probably taking some pictures, and they'll also, those Maasai there would also obviously use M-Pesa. It's a very important medium now and spreading all over Africa. Here we're seeing a mother with pre- and postnatal care getting some instruction and information on her phone with her baby, or we don't know if it's the baby that's reading away, the baby's sleeping. But of course babies now can also pick up, maybe babies can give parental care. That's a whole new thing maybe we should look at. Here's another interesting example out in the rural areas, a very common way in which messaging and health and wellness messaging is delivered, as you can see there. This is an important group, MAMA, which is actually funded to a certain degree by USAID in Washington, but this actually provides SMS instruction for pre- and postnatal care. Very, very interesting platform, and a platform that's doing exceptionally well in Southern and Central Africa. A good model that's starting to also migrate into other parts of Africa. Just to give you an idea of the way that things are working in a much less sophisticated environment than we are used to here in the United States. Now here's something interesting. Samsung are doing really great work in Africa. They've decided that what they're going to do is they are going to create smart healthcare solutions. Now, of course, Samsung last year sold 330 million handsets, but in Africa, they've got a particular idea of taking a shipping container with equipment allowing for a range of medical services. They'd look at radiology, screening, ophthalmology, dental services, and also everyday screenings, blood pressure, diabetes, and so forth. Their partners include Aspen Pharmaceutical, but effectively what they're going to do is they are providing these mobile health centers that go around the rural areas, and they have a goal to reach 1 million people with these health centers by 2015 and positively impact 5 million lives by 2015. They've also got a whole range of solar-powered internet schools. So what you saw yesterday with Dean Kamen, Samsung have actually been very, very interesting in the way they've taken making products for Africa, for Africans, with an African tilt and African environmental requirements, and really eating some of Nokia's lunch as well, because Nokia, until just a couple of years ago, had a near 70% market share in Africa. That's changing, and the low-cost Samsung smartphones, plus stuff like this. Here's another picture of the Samsung mobile health vehicle. You can see, I don't think this one is made out of a container, but this gives you an idea. And this is coming into countries like South Africa, obviously well developed there, but Botswana, Lesotho, the poorest country in Africa, Nigeria, Rwanda, the Ivory Coast, that's recovering now from the political instability. Here's a wonderful fellow. This guy is really a fantastic example of African ingenuity meets wireless health. His name is Bright Simons. No relation to me. We look alike, but no relation. It's worth it. It's not a bad line. Don, what do you think? Just got a titter there, not much, but anyway. Bright is a really interesting bloke. He created a company called M Pedigree Networks. You see there's some pharmaceuticals, and if you look on the bottom left of the box, you can see a little number with a white strip. Well, what he did was he empowered consumers to instantly verify with a free text message that their medicines are safe and not counterfeit. And what he said was this: technology became a weapon against pharmaceutical counterfeiting. It protects consumers from poisonous medicines made to look like the real stuff. what he did with M-Pedigree was he also developed an electronic resource platform for managing distribution networks and empowering regulators and the weeding out of uncertified and unregistered products. So what happens is you get pharmaceuticals from a chemist or a drugstore, and you see on the box is a text number. You then text that, and you get a text message back immediately. It's free to you, the user, that tells you whether the drugs are counterfeit or not. I mean, it's hard in America to imagine that when you get drugs from a drugstore that, you're getting basically just powder that's not a proper FDA-approved pharmaceutical. In Africa, unfortunately, you get sometimes even the wool they pull over your eyes is 50% cotton. You've got to be sure that you know what is in the box of pharmaceuticals. Okay, so here's another very interesting fellow. This chap actually happens to be an Indian guy by the name of Mishkin Ingawala. And what do you think he's holding up there? Do you think that's a bottle of a glass of Cristal champagne, anyone? Not quite. That, of course, is a tub of urine. And why Mishkin is so interesting and important, I was with him a couple of weeks ago in Morocco. I was in Morocco with an interesting group. How many of you have heard of Semester at Sea? So Semester at Sea is a program for the last 50 years by the University of Virginia. And Semester at Sea invited a group from Boulder, Colorado called the Unreasonable Institute, a group of inventors, techies, disruptors, troublemakers who are all unreasonable, coming up with great technology. And Mishkin was on the ship because this has got a lot of potential for Africa. He created a company called UCheck, which is going to have a lot of impact in Africa. What UCheck is, it uses the camera on a smartphone for users to take a photograph of test strips or dipsticks in checking the levels of blood glucose, urobilinogen, nitrites, ketones, helocytes, glucose in urine, and basically to check for diabetics, to check their glucose. And the camera allows the system to process and generate automated results and data. Very interesting in an African environment. That's what you actually get when you send a photograph of the little paper strip. It's 100% accurate, on a par with high-end urine analyzers. It costs 99 cents for the mobile app, about $20 for a pack of strips. But this is a fantastic way for Africa to use wireless and wireless technology for kidney, liver, and urinary tract infection analysis. I mean, interesting. It's a fellow from India, from Mumbai, who took this to Africa, and this gives you an example of some of the ingenuity and creativity that's helping drive things in Africa. Here's the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. He doesn't allow a cabinet meeting to begin until people bring, and all his cabinet ministers bring their iPad into the mix. This gives you a sense of the new Africa. So coming to 65% mobile and growing. We must look at this continent. Very important. He did, he does. How many of you can recognize that bloke there with a wonderful smile on his face? Nobody, I don't believe it. How many of you have heard of, who's that? Jacob Zuma. Oh my God. Where do you come from? Who's that? That is Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Nobel laureate, who loves America. He's a professor at Emory University in Atlanta. Anyway, you can see even he loves mixing with the medical fraternity. Look at him there. So glee, getting a shot in the arm. So ladies and gentlemen, in closing, may I just say this. Africa is no longer the dark continent. Not at all. As you can see from that slide, it's the wireless and mobile future. So if you really know what you want to do about developing your international business, wearable, everything, connected health, you must look at Africa. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Adios.